All right, y'all. Welcome back. Acquire and Operate. We are out here buying and building enduring small niche vertical SaaS businesses, aka Micro SaaS. And we're doing it in public. And holy smokes, K-Lou, it's been a few weeks. There's a lot of action in our world. We're heating up, ready for the next chapter here. But I'm excited to see you, man. We had kind of the 4th of July holiday. There was another kind of podcast situation that we used for last week's issue. So I'm very excited on a Friday morning. I know we're both dragging a little bit with all the action in our world, but I'm excited to be chopping it up with you, man.
Yeah, same here, man. I'm just happy to be hustling and bustling, just back in the game this week, man. It's been a crazy few weeks for sure.
No doubt. And so today we are going to be talking about an operating concept. And the headline is the number one constraint holding back growth. You could say performance as well, because what we're going to talk about applies to a whole bunch of action, not only kind of top line growth and how acquisition funnels and stuff like that, but you can also apply it to anything that has marginal improvement for efficiency. So anything, really anything. I'll leave it at that. So table of contents. So there's a little bit of kind of table setting here to get us going. So we'll do a quick intro to systems thinking as kind of the big macro context, and then we'll transition into the theory of constraints. And then we'll be into it. And we'll be talking about how we use systems thinking and the theory of constraints when we think about user acquisition funnels, because that's a very defined, very easy to analyze system. And then we'll put an example and practice out there to make it real. Sound good?
Gucci gang. I would add to that and say another way to think of your constraint is, what is the roadblock to your North Star? There's always something that's holding you back from crushing that North Star metric, right? All right, focus on that. That is your constraint.
Yeah, totally. Or you know what's like a crazy one? I was listening to a podcast a long time ago with Hermosi, and from his fitness thing. I can't remember what the exact example, so I'll just think of one off the top, where he's like, all right, let's say you're deadlifting, which is when you bend on the ground, pick up a big heavy bar and stand straight up. And you're allowed to, or I guess depending on kind of the thing, but and so most people are like, hey, I can't lift beyond a certain amount. It's like, oh, okay, maybe your quads, your hamstrings need to be stronger. And the number one constraint is usually ankle mobility. So he's like, if you can fix your ankle mobility, you're going to be able to activate the strength that you already have. Yeah. Or the other one is
if you improve your lower back muscles or something like that.
But that's what you would assume, right? But it just kind of gives you a sense where if you think about, all right, what's the system in play here to execute this movement? And then you're only as strong as the weakest link.
And that could be like the ankle or your wrist. Like,
or said another way, like, maybe your grip strength, fatigue, like maybe you could do more pull-ups and like your grip strength is the number one constraint. So and that's a great analogy. I should have written about that, but and that's back to like, you're only as good as your weakest link, right? And that's kind of the OG way to articulate the theory of constraints. So in business, you got to default, or you got to be careful not to default to, I could deadlift more if my quads were stronger. It's like, well, maybe look at the system, right? Like, what are the elements that are failing you? And it's like, hey, if you start doing some mobility for your ankles, oh shit, you just unlock a bunch of new weight because you already have that strength. You're just not accessible to you.
It's funny you mentioned that. Let me add a personal example to that. So there was once upon a time I was doing this challenge to do like 100+ push-ups a day. And after about a few weeks, I noticed I got a lot of fatigue in my wrist. That impacted how I was doing bench press, deadlifts, pull-ups, and everything else. So basically every workout that involved my arm, specifically my wrist area, had to cut that out for a few weeks because that became my weakest link. Now I had to take all the weight off and just use a basic like dumbbell bar and just rebuild the strength in my wrist in order to go back to lifting again. So yeah, no, you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head.
Cool. So a while back, at some stage, I need to get him on this podcast. A dear buddy, Dylan Dempsey, he just used a different language that I wasn't familiar with. Inputs and outputs, base rates, operating leverage. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, but this isn't really an assembly line. Like, it's not a factory. And so he gave me this book called Thinking in Systems, which is dense as hell, but absolutely extraordinary. And it totally changed the way I see the entire world, where it's like everything is a system, just as we discussed, right? Your body in particular is totally a system, right? And just everything around us is a system, inputs, outputs, we have an impact on other stuff has an impact on us. Our little mini system exists within, our my condo exists within our neighborhood, the neighborhood exists within the United States, and you start to think, okay, like there's some methodology here that we can use to really level up how we think about things as a way of understanding the components and the parts. So some language I already had touched on. You have inputs and outputs, feedback loops. Oh my God, leverage points, etc. And so I kind of was introduced to this thinking in systems, and it's so applicable to SaaS. And then you kind of complement that with some Ray Dalio, where he would basically look to, I guess, visually represent Bridgewater in terms of inputs and outputs, and leveraging data to find patterns. So some of the best thinkers in the world, you guessed it, think in systems. And I just wanted to touch on that. It's what I've done that's been very impactful as well, is kind of complement that with a big emphasis on frameworks and mental models. Because, and this is, Charlie Mungerism. There's a lot of folks where he's like, your worldview should be like a lattice work of mental models, or put in the way that I would describe it to my son, you should see the world as a series of Lego blocks that snap together into a worldview. And that way, when something breaks down, you're like, okay, it's over here somewhere in the assembled Lego toy, and it's like this piece right here. This is not working, and then you can pull that piece out, look at it, critique it, and then update, refresh it with something better and slot it back in. So it's just a way to organize how you see the world, and it leads to huge gains in productivity as you start to analyze performance and a lot of stuff. So I'm going to read some definitions. So we're going to start, just to take it from the top, we're going to start with the definition of systems thinking, because the theory of constraints really fits into that narrative. And then we'll jump into a user acquisition funnel, which is like a system that is straightforward as hell. And then again, we'll jam on an example. So systems thinking is a holistic approach to analysis that focuses on how a system's constituent parts interrelate and how systems work over time and within the context of larger systems. It involves understanding the structure, behavior, and interactions within the system to identify patterns, leverage points, and potential solutions to problems. Some of the key concepts: interconnectedness, right? If something exists in a system, it has an impact on other things, and other things have an impact on this.
It is a cog in a wheel.
Right? Feedback loops. So there are both positive and negative loops, right? So stuff can amplify, stuff can dampen. And more importantly, you want to be very thoughtful. We talked about this ad nauseum, honestly, but what are the feedback loops in your business is one of the most important questions that we ask early days when we're talking to a firm that's looking for some kind of exit or a partnership. Stock and flow. So this is where we start to think, okay, assembly line, inventory, right? So you can consider like the stocks are the elements or resources within the system, and the flows are the rates at which stocks change. So throughput, stuff like that. So for an example, in a business context, right? Like for stock, it might be customers, and for flow, it's sales or revenue.
The sales process, yeah.
And then you have leverage points. And this was I guess my best attempt at a simplified version of a definition, but it identifies points within the system where a small change can lead to significant improvement or shifts in system behavior. And
so think Pareto principle, 80-20?
100. Right? What are the 20% of things that realize 80% of the outcomes we care about? Another way to think about it, and this isn't always very easy to quantify, but anything where you put 1 unit of energy in and you get more than 1 unit of energy out, there's implied leverage. And so it's our job to find, cool, if I put 1 in here, I get 10 out. If I put 1 in here, I get 1,000,000 out. Obviously focus on the latter. And then the last is a holistic perspective. So you have to be thoughtful that the system exists as a whole. Like you can't just factor individual components or think about individual components in isolation. Systems thinking, boom, bam. So now moving on to the theory of constraints. So this is a management philosophy, and it's not like as explicitly as you would expect attached to systems thinking, but it was introduced by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt in a book that I think was called The Goal. But it's basically that like one of the most important roles for management is to identify the primary constraint or bottleneck that limits systems performance. And basically your job at any given point is to attack the number one constraint. And then once you improve that constraint, you move on to the next constraint. And you need to be thoughtful in how you analyze those constraints and how you analyze the impact that it would have to improve those constraints, because it's all relative. right? It's like, I could put new tires on my car and it'll drive 5 miles faster. And that's, going to cost me $100. Or I could put this little chip in the thing that gives it the turbocharge, and that costs me $10, and it'll make the car go 500 miles an hour faster. It's like, oh God, start with the chip. Put the chip in there, and then, refresh the tires. So here are some key concepts. Or I guess this is kind of like an order of operations, I should say. So you want to identify the constraint, which is most important. So determine the most significant limiting factor that prevents the system from achieving higher performance. You want to then exploit the constraint. So make the best possible use of the constraint's capacity without significant investment. So that's do the best you can without allocating a ton of resources. And then subordinate everything else. So just make it a priority. And if your attempts to improve the constraint, you just reduce the impact of the constraint, solve for the constraint, however you want to think about it. If you're unable to do that with minimal resources, then you got to level up what you're doing, because you got to knock down that constraint if you're going to improve the performance of the overall system. So simply put, right, like a system's performance is only as strong as its weakest link.
And I would add
the weakest link. Goodbye.
Right. I would add another example to this. Business intelligence. I mean, it's the hot topic of the last decade. What was the biggest constraint before? Systems just weren't talking to each other. And then you also have like departments of people who aren't communicating as well. So then you see tools like Slack and other integration solutions like Zapier, where one, we're going to create a communication workspace. So everyone is just going to talk within channels, threads, whatever. And then we're going to include integration tools like Zapier that's going to bring all your data silos together. And then we're going to layer that with a data box or Tableau to now give you insights across all of it. So whatever constraints you thought you had before in the business, you're going to remap your entire Rev ops. So the people you source, the processes you write, and the tools you implement, they're all going to align around business intelligence, integrated data sources, and tons of data getting processed and communicated.
For sure. And we're going to and I should have hammered on this earlier and more often in the post, but visibility is like probably the biggest constraint. And this doesn't necessarily track, but if you can't measure what you can, or you can only fix what you can measure, right? Like there's a ton of management mantras here. So like your constraint to being able to attack constraints is visibility. So without visibility is the prerequisite of the century. And so I first matter of fact is if you can't in real time explain what the number one constraint is for the business, you're not in a good spot.
Right.
And that's oh shit, we don't have the visibility we need. Drop everything and get it done. Okay, so let's dive in now to a user acquisition funnel as a little bit of a case study here. Do this one. Okay, cool. So I guess just definition of terms, let's get aligned real quick. So there's some different, so a user acquisition funnel in a SaaS context, there's some different ways to spin it. This is probably the most mutually agreed on. It's the R funnel. So therefore it's considered the pirate funnel, which I've always thought was kind of cheeky.
I don't miss this at all for my sales days.
Top to bottom, or as we've spoken about, it's the bow tie is kind of replaced the conventional funnel. But so you would think about it left to right or top to bottom. It starts with awareness. How many people are you reaching? This is like new website visitors, etc. Acquisition, how many people visit your website? Or I guess how many people do you reach would be people that touch your content, read your blog posts, look at your social media posts, outbound emails, cold calls, whatever. Acquisition, how many people visit your website, how many people sign up for a trial, whatever the case may be. Activation, how many people commit to a subscription, and then you get into retention. Do they churn? Do they stick around? And then you get into revenues, but you should probably consider this more like lifetime value, because that's the objective, is to get an acquired customer as cost effectively as possible, who sticks with you for as long as humanly possible. And then ideally the true end of it is you turn them into referral. So evangelist, somebody out there spreading the word, because your product is so amazing, your impact on their business, on their life has been so amazing. So that's the funnel. And so order of operations. So the most important thing, period, is to establish performance benchmarks. And so, gosh, it's just so interesting. Where it's hey, yeah, let's fix this thing. We could let's try to get more trial signups. And it's okay. Why? And it's like, well, because it's only 2% of people that visit our website sign up for a trial. That feels like a low percentage. It's like, okay, well, what about relative to, or I guess, how about that relative to your own performance 3 months ago? Well, it was 1%. Okay, so you've improved it 2 times. That's a 200% improvement in 90 days. It seems like that is like whatever you're doing is working or it's getting better. Or a more important question to ask is on a relative basis to your closest peer group, how is 2%? Because the worst thing you can possibly do is say, "Oh my God, we need to fix the amount of signups to trial from people, or we're going to attack website visitors to trial signups. It's at 2%. That sounds low. Let's go really hard at it." And then lo and behold, you get your hand on some benchmark data where it's like, actually, 1% is awesome. So we're twice as good as awesome. And we're allocating all of our energy here to a thing where we're already performing elite. So you must understand performance on a relative basis, and it's either relative to your business previously in time and what's that rate of improvement look like, or more importantly, what's your performance look like relative to your closest peer group. The challenge is that it's very difficult to get your hands on benchmarks. But the good news is people know that, and groups like OpenView and others have a ton of data that they get via survey, and they have big portfolios, so they actually have access to the data. So here's some benchmarks that Kyle Poirier produces on like somewhat of an annual basis, and these are broken down by go-to-market motion. So you have a freemium, which you sign up for a free thing, you start using it, it's great. If you want to use the cooler stuff, you got to pay. You got a free trial, which is sign up, use the thing for free for a week or two, and then you got to pay. You've got sales led, which is, hey, you look like our best customers. Do you have these pain points? Yeah, cool. Let's do a demo. Cool. There's value here. Let's negotiate a proposal. Great. You're loving it. Buy it. Let's get you implemented. Happy days. And those are really kind of the flavors. So freemium and free trial would kind of fall under the product led pieces, but I almost hesitate to use the term PLG anymore because I think it's just not relevant. But so let's give some examples. So for today, we're going to be talking about a free trial motion, which is somebody comes to your website, signs up for a free trial. There's no humans involved. They onboard themselves into the product. And you're hoping that they achieve that aha moment where it's like, holy shit, this thing just saved the day with this pain point that's really killing me. I perceive the value as fast as humanly possible. I'm more liable to make a purchasing decision, subscribe, or sign up for a subscription, become monthly recurring revenue. So free trial. How do you and it starts with, so the one thing, and we'll talk about this, but it's very difficult to get the tippity top of the funnel benchmarks, which is like, what's a good volume of website visitors for a CRM centric SaaS that caters to SMB? It's too much variance. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, it changes every month.
Where we start to get, and it's just so much variance that it's just impossible, or it's very difficult. So, but what we can say is, when it comes to questions like how many unique visitors sign up, how many of those signups achieve their aha moment, and then how many of those signups convert to paid accounts. Those we can get very specific around. So the benchmarks that Kyle here has provided is that when it comes to the site visitor to trial sign up, you're shooting for 3 to 4%. So back to my example, if it's like, hey, we're punching at 2%, there is room for improvement for you to achieve face rate performance measured against your peers. Of the people who sign up for a trial, how many achieve their aha moment? And that's going to be a function of product usage. You want 20-40%. So this is where, when we visualize this, you'll start to see it because it's a funnel. So let's say 100 people visit your website, 3 or 4% are going to sign up for a trial. That's now 3 or 4. Of those 3 or 4, 20 or 40% are going to achieve their aha moment. So that's, down to like 1. And then how many signups convert to paid accounts? Less than 1. So for you to generate more than 1 new paying users, guess what? You need more than 100 site visitors a month for your totally SOL. So first thing, benchmarks. We need to frame our point of view against relative performance. And in this example, we want, for people coming to your website, we want more than 3 to 4% of them to sign up for it, or we want 3 to 4% or more to sign up for a trial. Of the people who sign up for a trial, we want 20 to 40% or more to achieve their aha moment. Of those that achieve their aha moment, we want 17% or more to convert to paying customers. Cool. That was a mouthful. Dear God.
That yeah, that definitely was. I was gonna jump in and say, just a shameless plug to one of our previous episodes, to work with your users to figure out what that aha moment looks like for them. You can start setting up that trial sign up survey just to identify why are you signing up for this platform? What are you hoping to accomplish with this platform? And over time, revamp your onboarding experience to get tied and tailored more to that option that they filled out during sign up. So they're thrown right into the flow to get to that aha moment a lot faster. But it all starts with that primary research, speaking with your users, touching your internal team and seeing, hey, what have you seen our users do as well? And just collecting all of that feedback to identify where is that leverage point, as we mentioned earlier.
Love it. So yeah, this associates with a ton of concepts, you guessed it, that we've touched on. All right, so now the fun part, identify and attack the living hell out of the constraint. So just real quick order of operations, and then I'll expand this example and we'll dive in. But I mean, and it's pretty basic. Like it can be a very manual exercise, but obviously the implication is that you have visibility to this stuff. So create a simple Google sheet or whatever. Drop in your benchmarks for what you're targeting. Like, what does good performance look like for each area of the funnel? Cool. Now let's drop in our base rates. Okay. And to achieve base rates, you want to look at your performance over 90 days or 180 days. And then you want to, I guess, deduce a monthly average. So month 3 was 40, month 2 was 35, month 3 was 35. Your average is like 38, right? Something like that. But you want to establish base rates, and then you can look at the delta, the difference between benchmarks and base rates to uncover areas for potential improvement. And this is what it might look like. So in this example, and is that blowing up for you? No.
I was gonna add,
Hold on.
as we're looking back and yeah, go ahead.
Let me do.
It's able to open up when you click the image.
So yeah, it's the image is a little bit huge. Sorry, give me one sec here. Okay, so I'm just gonna zoom in. How's that? Better?
Yeah, that's good. That's readable.
Okay, cool. So here we have benchmarks, and this is a simplified version. So we're gonna look at new visitors, the percentage of new visitors so anything noted with a percentage symbol here. And for the listeners, we're just looking at a simple spreadsheet. So the first column is the item. So we're going to be looking at benchmarks, our base rates, our relative room for improvement, and then what happens if we optimize the number 1 constraint, what happens if we optimize the number 2 constraint, and what happens if we optimize both. So those are the rows. The columns, we have new visitors, which is a number. We then have the conversion rate, so the percentage of new visitors that convert into trial signups. Then we have the trial signups, and then we have the conversion rate between trial signups and the new paying users. And then I added average revenue per user so that we could back into new MRR, because so if we're thinking back to inputs and outputs, in this example, the input is new visitors and the desired output is MRR. That is a system, baby. Inputs and outputs. What we're looking at, so the things that are in blue are noted as like the inputs. So what you'll notice is you can't just change the number of trial signups. What you can change is how many people come to your website and the percentage of those visitors that convert to trial signups. So you'll see that our points of leverage are really the first input, and then the conversion rates that happen throughout the rest. And obviously average revenue per user is another one. But so in our example, we've got our benchmarks we're shooting for, which I pulled from Kyle Poirier. So we want 3.5% of the people who visit our website to sign up for a trial. Of those that sign up for a trial, we want 17% to become new paying users. So those are the benchmarks we're working with. In this example, let's look at our base rates. We said our base rate average per month, we get 3,500 website visitors. We then 3%, which is pretty close to 3.5, sign up for a trial. So if we get 3,500, 33% sign up for a trial, we now have 105 trial signups. Then we're shooting for, we want 17% of those 105 folks to sign up as paying users. Right now, unfortunately, our base rate is 12%. So there's 5% rate of our margin for improvement from 12 to 17. But currently, of the 105, 12% become paying users. That gives us 13 new paying users, each of which is paying $40 per month. That's $504 of net new MRR. based on that funnel, based on that system.
Boom.
All good? And I'm sorry for the listeners just getting absolutely peppered with numbers. All right. So if we look at this now it's very important that we look at a relative room for improvement. So back to our visitor to trial sign up, we could go from 3.0 to 3.5%. So that 0.5% is the actual absolute margin for improvement. But on a relative basis, the lift from 3% to 3.5% is about a 16% improvement.
Yeah.
If we look at our trial to paid users conversion rate, we're currently punching at 12%. We want to be at 17%. We've got 41% room for improvement here. So what's the number one constraint, Kev?
Number one constraint here is trial signups to new paying users.
Beautiful. So, and we can see, okay, what happens if we do that? So now we've got 3,500 visitors, 3% sign up for a trial. We keep that as is, or we assume it'll stay as is. Now we've got 105 trial signups. Oh, snap. Now we're at 17% conversion rate from trial to paid users. Our new paying users per month goes from 13 to 18. And now
ARPU, baby.
And ARPU is a huge leverage point, right? But when we'll touch on that. So now we were generating $504 in new MRR. If we're able to improve our trial to paid conversion from 12% to 17%, oh my God, now we're doing $714 in new MRR, and that's a delta of $210.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you'll see that that improvement straight up translates all the way down. So it's like, cool, if we can improve our trial to new paying users by 41%, guess what the lift is to MRR? 41%. So it's outstanding. All right, now let's say, okay, and then it's important that and we've spoken about this ad nauseum, but the RICE methodology, which so reach, impact, and confidence are the things that go into like the upside of the bet, and you have to balance that against effort or risk. And it's very thoughtful when you're thinking about funnel optimizations or you're thinking about the theory of constraints to think about it in that context, because you want to execute the low-hanging fruit first because it's less resource intense, etc. So in our example, it's like, or I guess new visitor, or there's different degrees of difficulty for improving different things. So in this case, we identified, okay, holy shit, if we can improve trial signups to new paying users, by 41%, it's going to unlock 41% improvement. But that might be 10 times more difficult than fixing the new visitor to trial signups. So it's like, actually, let's go at that constraint first because we can fix it quickly. And then let's move on to the next up constraint, because that's going to be way more resource intense. And on a relative basis, as seen through the RICE methodology, this is where we should start. So if we looked at optimizing the second constraint, and I'll just jump to the end, it would have about an $84 per month MRR impact. So instead of generating 504, so if we fixed for the 3,500 people who come to our website, if 3.5% of them sign up for a trial instead of 3%, we're going to see a lift of $84 in new MRR per month.
Yeah, so from 504 to 588. Yeah.
So our first example was a $210 lift, right? Which is almost 3 times bigger improvement. So, and without getting too much further in the weeds, hopefully that, this kind of sets some context around, like, first, let's identify the constraints, or let's identify the room for improvement on a relative basis. How are we doing? What do benchmarks look like? Cool. Now we're clear on basically the margin that we have to improve across these different dimensions. Let's now consider the level of effort that goes behind attacking these constraints, and then let's execute a game plan. So let's say you sequence them and you're like, cool, first we're going to fix our trial to paid user conversion rate, because we think we can, update the onboarding experience or get them to the aha moment much quicker, et cetera, et cetera. Great. Once that's done, then we're going to attack our new visitor to trial signups. And that can be, we're going to do a new website. We're going to introduce more social proof. We're going to update the account creation flow, stuff like that. If you do both things, you'll see a 65% improvement in your new MRR per month, which is pretty outstanding.
That is pretty outstanding. And I would add to the thought of using the RICE framework. Again, everything that you're doing is being balanced against the effort that's going into improving these base rates. What you also want to think about is the position you're operating from, is it a place of scarcity or is it a place of abundance? If you have all the resources in the world and you could just run hard at, let's say, improving the trial to paid user conversion rate because that has a higher uplift in revenue, 41%, right? Then go at that. But if you're operating from a place of scarcity where you don't have a ton of money and people and resources to really go hard at that other piece, given the RICE framework, then start with the new visitor to trial sign up conversion and trying to lift that base rate. That 16% with the $84 added on per month, that little extra revenue can go a long way in then helping you prioritize what do we need to do to attack trial to paid users, right?
Exactly. And that's just, and then you can start to think of business like probably the most important thing to do as an operator is to sequence the constraints. Like
Exactly.
a business plan can be that after you make an acquisition. This is the first
Do what
constraint.
makes sense for you.
This is the first constraint we're going to attack. Once that's resolved, this is the next constraint, and so forth and so on. Okay, cool. So now some context. So you have to, so this is a system. It's all connected. The thing that's very interesting then, right, is that a 10% improvement anywhere is going to have the same effect. So this is back to like, what's the lowest hanging fruit? So as you look at your thing and depending on your experience level, it's like, oh, I know we can do this and create a 10% improvement here. And it's easy. Do it because that's going to have the same impact as a 10% improvement anywhere else. These things are all attached and connected, right? You have inputs and outputs and conversion rates. And we've spoken about this a lot, but it's very important to consider the level of effort. So just think like, where can we create, or like, here's the biggest margin for improvement. What's the easiest way for us to create XYZ percentage improvement? Because that's going to realize the same gains, productivity and performance wise at any other stage. And then here's the last one is that in our example, I didn't add a vector for driving new visitors. So basically our example was we can like going hard at conversion rates. So we can fix either our new visitor to trial sign up conversion rate, or we can fix the next up conversion rate, which is trial signups to new paying users. You can also drive new visitors. So create more inputs into the system at the very beginning. And that's generally considered best practice because if you put more inputs through the entire system, you're basically increasing your surface area for luck. That like, well, I don't know, like our typical conversion is this or that, but maybe we were, only bringing bad fit people into our funnel. So you want to drive as much volume through the funnel as you can because it increases that surface area for luck, for lack of a better way to describe it. And also you're going to harvest a shitload more data. So it's
visibility.
and it bolsters the feedback loop, right? So it's like, it's like, hey, this is all weird. Let's just drive a ton of traffic through the funnel. Let's buy some ads. Let's kick off some outbound. And then let's come back to the drawing board because we'll have a much more informed kind of objective point of view on what our performance looks like. And I think you need to achieve some type of critical mass in the funnel to even make smart decisions. So
absolutely. So run fast and make mistakes.
and just pump stuff. And a lot of people are like, oh God, but then we're burning opportunities with prospective customers. And it's like, we're a goldfish, man. Our short-term memory is a joke. So it's like, hey, we've sent emails to all these people. They told us to kick rocks. And the only risk there is unsubscribes and some other stuff. And you don't want to cannibalize your surface area for opportunities. But I would just be careful to hesitate to drive volume through your funnel because you'll learn a ton and the trade-offs are worth it, mostly.
Yeah. And honestly, burning a few leads, that's the name of the game. You're going to crack a few eggs to get that omelet. So, hey, to establish that base rates, you're going to end up pissing some people off. But once you get the base rates established, now you have the lever you can pull with updating your messaging, being a bit more strategic with how you go back after that community. And then for the folks you might have upset before, give it some time, and then maybe after 6 months, start to nurture them and see what type of content may bring them back in. But like we said, we have the attention span of a goldfish. We won't remember.
Yeah, I can't tell you who cold emailed me yesterday. I'm like, I don't know.
I don't care. Just go away, and when you come back with a better message.
Yeah, that's it. So hopefully, you can see how profound this is. Dude, this is how we see everything under the sun, from fitness and nutrition to relationships to how you operate businesses. It's absolutely insane. So hopefully this is helpful. The business you're running is a system. Everything's a system, and the sooner you can kind of see it that way and you can understand your performance relative to yourself, right? Am I getting stronger? Am I stronger next month than I was this month? Versus how strong am I measured against other 36-year-olds that are 6 feet, 165 pounds? Those are your benchmarks. Those are your hallmarks. That's the stuff you bank your North Star against. And your job is to systematize how you look at this stuff with good analytics and visibility. That's prerequisite number one. And then you can prioritize, this is the weakest link in my chain. This is the second weakest link. This is the third weakest link. I'm going to look at this and determine the level of effort associated with improving each of these various dimensions. And then I'm going to put together a game plan and go hard as shit at execution. That's that.
Absolutely. I have one thought to add. For the listeners that were listening today, we threw a lot of concepts and numbers at you. You definitely want to watch this episode on YouTube to grasp the full concept.
Yeah, and in the newsletter as well. And oh yeah, share it if you want.
Share it. Like, subscribe, share.
I'm so not good at that. Like, we need to start with that. But yeah, pass this on along if it's helpful. Or if you disagree, if you think this is all misguided, even better. Please, guys,
give us that feedback.
I would love to talk to you. How are you thinking about the world?
We'll say we're authentic to a fault. So we're not the like, share, subscribe kind of guys. And like Teal said, if you think the content could be better, say that. We'll literally call it out and try to be better.
Yeah. Or come on and talk to us. You know, where do you disagree? How do you think about it? Right? How do you optimize funnels? How do you even think about funnels?
What's worked for you? Yeah.
Where do you get your base rates or your benchmarks? That's what I want to know.
What books are you studying? What books are you studying? Yes. What can you share?
This is all in the interest of being all students of the business, students of the game. And with that, it's for the love of the game. God bless. K-Lou? Laser beams, baby. Laser beams. Excellent. Pleasure to share the field of battle with you, my man. I will see you next week.
Until next time, baby. Take care.